Hi everyone, welcome to Bonnie Caroline Makes Cards. Today's card features a downloadable cut file from Alex Siberia Designs July release. This one is called Magic Flower. I love die cuts and I'm fortunate enough to own a scan and cut, but this is the first time I have downloaded a cut file to cut out on my machine. I was happy to discover that this is a pretty simple process. If you're interested, I've outlined it on my blog at bonniecarolee.com. So here we go, let's get started. Magic Flower was scanned and cut on Neenah Classic Crest 80-pound cardstock. I began by taking the die cut panel and stenciling a background. This would be my guide to coloring with Copic markers. The coloring of the design is very quick and not at all precise. What I was aiming to do was to get in some shadow areas at the base of each of the petals and highlights at the top. As I was coloring, I would frequently put the die cut background over top just to get an idea of how it was looking. For the shadow areas, I worked with BG49 and blended up into BG45. The highlights were done with BG23 or 34. I use them interchangeably just to add some variation. As I said earlier, there is nothing precise about this coloring. It really is just getting that suggestion of shadow and highlights. So the long and the short of it is, this panel was colored pretty quickly. The die cut panel is embossed with WOW Metallic Gold Rich Ultra High embossing powder. I ended up embossing it twice. As you can see, for the first time, what I was doing was taking the panel and pressing it into the ink pad and then putting the embossing powder on it. Well, I ended up with ink all over my hands and a mess, so I changed things up for the second round. I didn't get very good coverage. I think that if I had applied the ink pad directly to the panel like I am doing now, that I probably would not have to have embossed it twice. And I didn't have the mess that I had the first time. Both applications of embossing powder were applied to 1/2 of the panel at a time. This is the first time that I have worked with the ultra high embossing powder. It is definitely meant for larger pieces like this. I actually ordered this by mistake, thinking that I was getting fine embossing powder, and I tried it on a sentiment and I thought that the grain size looked a little large, but I went ahead and yep, it obliterated it. But if you want to emboss anything that does not have fine details, it is amazing. You get a nice, thick, even covering. Careful, when working with this embossing powder, it does need to cool down and set up. If you do get a finger mark, it is an easy remedy. Just reapply the heat for a couple of seconds. For the glazing technique that I would be using, I wanted a bit more dimension. The Magic Flower design was cut onto black sheet foam. I adjusted the blade depth to number 12, which is the highest setting. It cut through the foam fine. There were a few pieces that I had to help pop out. The foam was dotted with Tombow glue and left to dry. The glue is tacky and repositionable, making it easier to align the embossed panel to the foam one. I did have a bit of excess foam around the edges of the panel, and that was trimmed off. To adhere the foam backed die cut panel to the background, again I used Tombow glue, let it dry until it was nice and tacky, and then positioned it. Using the glue in this way, not only gives me some flexibility in terms of lining it up, but it also ensures that I'm not going to be dealing with any glue seeping out onto the background. Using the same markers as I used on the background, I create an ombre effect that I will die cut a sentiment out of. Simon Says Stamps Sending Smiles die is cut from the Copic colored panel and 3 times from teal cardstock. The sentiment is stacked, and a little bit of Gina K Glitz Glitter Gel gives it a sparkly finish. The foam-backed panel is adhered to a top folding card base made from Neenah Classic Crest 110-pound cardstock. Nuvo Crystal Glaze was applied to all of the die cut openings. For the areas that were a little bit tight, I just used my tweezers and pushed the glaze in, making sure to wipe them off as soon as I had done that. Of course, I could have found a better tool to do that than the tweezers, but I tend to grab what I have on hand. When the glaze is dry, and I did leave mine overnight, it has an almost glass-like appearance. The glazing is very shiny and really makes that Copic coloring stand out. I wanted to add some detail to the flower center. I used a couple of sizes of gold confetti and then topped it up with Crystal Nuvo Drops Morning Dew. No worries about the crystal drops being so close that they may run together. The confetti does a good job of keeping them separate. And that wraps up this card featuring Alex Siberia Designs Magic Flower from the July release. This release has a great variety of designs that includes both digital stamps and cut files. They range from whimsical and fun to super gorgeous. I hope you have time to check it out. As always, I appreciate your visit.